Hello everyone and welcome back to the Let's Learn mini-series. Today we are going to be venturing away from paint as a medium altogether, but we're going to be holding on to a bit of that painterly vibe while using soft and pan pastels. While there were more people requesting acrylics or colored pencils for this series, simply put, I honestly just don't enjoy acrylics very much and I flat out dislike working with colored pencils. I don't want to let you guys down, but I do hope that you hear me out because I absolutely love working with pastels and I think you're really going to like today's video. Before we get started, I'd like to first thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video and making this mini-series possible. For those of you who don't already know about them, Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with over 25,000 classes in art, design, and business. I've spent a lot of time on Skillshare for this series, researching each new medium thoroughly before beginning recording. In this case, I was looking for classes on soft pastels and found one class in particular very helpful. Soft Pastels for Beginners by Kate Amedeo is a perfect place to start. She covers materials, including different pastel brands, some basic techniques, and goes over 3 different tutorials where she shows a lot of practical information. Later in this video, I'll let you know how you can join more than 7 million other creators learning and creating on Skillshare, but for now, let's go ahead and jump on into this wonderfully fun and tactile medium. First, let's cover the basics. What are pastels? Pastels are a dry medium opposed to paint, which is a wet medium. We're usually first introduced to chalk pastels as kids. Pigments are mixed with a binder as well as chalk as kind of a filler. As we graduate to artist quality supplies, we would then logically move from chalk pastels to soft pastels, which are a higher concentration of pigment with an inner binder, such as, but not always, gum arabic. If you increase the amount of binder in this formula, you'll end up with hard pastels, which are better for small detail work, but harder to lay down color with. Somewhere in between a soft pastel and a hard pastel is what you'll find inside of a pastel pencil, which is pastel encased in wood. More recently, a newer product called PanPastels have also become a popular option, which is an incredibly soft, high pigment product that is applied with little sponge applicators. All of the previous forms here are relatively compatible with each other, but then there are also oil pastels, which, as the name implies, use oil as a binder instead of an inert one like gum arabic. We won't be talking about those today, but I do have several forms of the other types of pastels to show you. In my collection, I have a small set of 12 Mungio soft pastels, an assortment of some maybe 2-decade-old pastel pencils from Generals, a very limited set of 10 PanPastels, and many different types of applicators that go with that PanPastel medium. You may also find common household items useful for working with pastels, such as tissues or Q-tips to blend, and hand wipes and/or a dry rag to clean your hands with regularly as you work. As for the paper, I have Canson's Mi Tientas paper, which from what I've seen on Skillshare seems to be the choice for those who are new to this medium. But I also have a couple of samples of higher quality, primed and sanded pastel paper that will give a go as well doing our little sample piece. You may or may not be wondering why I already have so many pastel supplies on hand when you've probably never heard me mention the medium at all. I think there was one challenge video like a year and a half ago or something. But anyway, when I left my job at the zoo, but before I was creating online content regularly, I taught as an after-school art instructor for elementary school-aged children. Chalk pastels came up in the curriculum rather regularly, and I pretty much hated chalk pastel days because, well, who wants to clean up a mess after 38-year-old kids who have just destroyed your classroom with all that chalk dust? But at the same time, when I really stopped to think about it and be in the moment when I was doing my sample pieces for them or showing them the different blending techniques, there was something so unbelievably calming about the way that the chalk would layer and build color. I came to really enjoy teaching that lesson about how to draw a pear or an apple, but fruit really is the extent of my pastel experience. After finding so much enjoyment in this medium, much how I experienced Crayola watercolors on Canson XL paper for the first time, if you remember hearing that story, this was a medium that just spoke to me, so I decided to buy a small set of soft pastels, add them to my pastel pencil collection that I had from high school, and ask for a small PanPastel set as a gift to get started. I did like 3 mediocre drawings with them, and then they landed themselves in the drawer while I came back to run the watercolor channel and just kind of didn't look back. You can't see it, but I'm miming a tear right now. The only excuse I have is that I never felt I had the time, but really that's not a good excuse given how much enjoyment I get out of them as a medium. Anywho, now that I have told you how we ended up here and you've seen me swatch out some of the materials that I'll be working with, it is time for our practice peach. I've only ever used pastels on paper before, either construction paper in the school classrooms or Canson pastel paper at home, so the sanded surface on the little sample piece of paper took some getting used to. It's like extremely fine grit sandpaper that has what pastel artists call tooth that holds the pigment to the page since there's so little binder in the soft pastels as a medium. I don't know a lot about pastels, but I do know that I'm supposed to start with a thin layer of PanPastels first, as they won't really adhere to other layers, and the tools that they're applied with tend to pick up other colors once the page is fully saturated with pigment. After a light layer of the PanPastel, I blended it out with my finger and moved on to the soft pastel sticks. In Kate's class that I mentioned earlier, she talks about how soft pastels can come in different hardnesses, and although I don't have something to compare these to, I feel like these could be softer, but they're not super hard, so either way I'm going to say that they lie somewhere in the middle of that hardness scale. On this paper, they lay down beautifully and evenly, although the tactile experience does take a little getting used to, but you will see a difference between this and when we move to the Canson paper for the main project, as they don't lay down quite the same way. I do a few layers with the soft pastels, blending between each before going in with my pastel pencils for some final details. I finish off by going back to the soft pastels to put in a few intentional textural strokes that I won't be blending out. All in all, though, I was very happy with how it turned out, though I do suppose I'm cheating a bit coming with all of that third grade level fruit painting experience. Moving on to the main event, I'm using that Canson pastel paper in a speckled gray color. It's taped to my usual watercolor board to stay flat, but also to create a nice border at the end of the painting by removing those strips. Using one of my own reference photos that I took many years ago, I started with a very basic sketch, laying out the proportions of this eastern yellow-billed hornbill. Using one of the rounded pastel sponges, I laid in some yellow ochre that will be later mixed with green to create a graded background. It's been a really long time since I researched the PanPastel specifically, but I do anticipate getting some questions about these tools, so I wanted to go ahead and try and answer some of those for you. I don't want to give any misinformation, but I will say that these applicators do handle differently than a standard makeup sponge would, even though they look very similar. I think that you can use makeup sponges in a pinch or on a budget, but this material is much more dense and holds the pigment a lot differently. If you have experience with these tools, you can let us know your thoughts on them in the comments below for others who might be wondering. As fun as the PanPastels were to blend these colors together, the color selection that I have is quite lacking and the black isn't as dark as I'd like, so I decided to layer these soft pastel sticks on top. As I alluded to earlier, the texture of this paper is different than that board we were using earlier, and it has a very mechanical texture to it. The soft pastels don't look super beautiful when they lay down on their first pass. However, I think one of the most interesting things about pastels is that they can go down looking like a hot mess, and then they can still be blended out to create this really divine, pillowy, soft texture. You can tell on this finished painting that the texture of the paper is still there, but it's not too terribly bad. I blended this large area with my fingers, which shockingly doesn't seem to bother me. I'm a very texturally sensitive person, and I don't like things being on my hands, but soft pastels seem to actually have a very cathartic effect on me, rather than an agitating one. I think knowing that I'm in control of the medium somehow helps, and that I can wash it off whenever I want and that it's not a big deal. It doesn't generally stain or potentially ruin clothing or surfaces like oil and acrylic paint would, so I say bring it on. I think this next bit was the most fun part of the entire painting, and that was laying down the values, but also hints of texture with the black and white PanPastels for the bird's gray and black feathers. Earlier I mentioned that I hate working with colored pencils unless I'm in a coloring book because I simply don't have the patience or passion to get the detail work down that colored pencils demand to be able to do them well. My body physically gets too tense, my shoulders, neck, and back start to hurt, and it's just not a good experience for me personally. On the other hand, though, you know I love flowy painterly textures, and laying down what would be the underpainting for this whole figure all at once was really satisfying and relatively quick. I also love that I could use the wand applicators like brushes for the majority of the piece, making it feel more like a painting instead of a drawing, and I only moved on to the pastel pencils at the end for the final details and textures. It helped alleviate a lot of the anxiety that I used to experience with pastel pencils or color pencils when used on their own and needing to fill these large spaces that just felt really daunting. I did surprise myself in that I didn't really go back to the soft pastel sticks much after doing the background. Historically, they're my favorite form of this medium, but because of the perspective I was going for in this piece, I didn't find that they had much of a place. In the original reference image, the eye, the base of the beak, and some of the feathers on the face are in focus, while everything out kind of blurs into suggestions, allowing you to focus on a small area of the piece. I really wanted to play with the aspect here, so I used the pencils for the details on the face and handled almost everything else with the PanPastels, leaving not a lot of room for those stick-formed pastels. However, everything worked out nicely, and I still had a lot of fun in the end. If you're new to this medium, but this video has piqued your interest, I encourage you to head on over to Skillshare and check out some of their beginners pastel classes. Whether you want to fuel your curiosity, feed your creativity just for fun, or want to add new skills to your art career toolbox, Skillshare can help keep you learning in 2019. A premium membership to the platform is less than $10 a month when billed annually and gives you unlimited access so you can find any class or community that you're looking to fit you and your goals for the new year. If you'd like to try Skillshare for free, check out the link in the description below to get a 2-month free trial for my first 500 subscribers that use the link. I know this medium isn't what most of you asked for, but I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this video as much as I did rekindling my love for this medium. If you end up trying out pastels, be sure to tag me over on Instagram so that I can see your lovely artwork and your new art adventures. We've got one more episode coming your way in this mini-series, and I still haven't firmly committed to a specific medium, so feel free to make your case in the comments below for what I should try next. If you're not already subscribed and would like to see more of this series as well as more watercolor content, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you know when the videos come out. Thank you all for watching. Thank you to Skillshare for allowing me to dedicate time to making this series, and to my patrons for helping to support this channel every single day. Until next time, happy painting!